the vertical blank.
History Series. Asteroids on Atari Consoles and Computers, Part 2, the 8-bit computers and the 5200. In this Part 2, we will cover the Atari 8-bit computer variants including the 400, 800, XL, XE, XEGS, and the 5200 console, and all of the significant asteroid variants we can find. There were quite a few attempts for these machines in the early years with mixed success, and even a few more recent versions to sink our teeth into. Let's get started. First, number 1, Asteroids by Atari, the classic. This version is a little slower than the 2600 version, but you can have 4 players compete at one time. There are multi-joy versions that will allow up to 4 players to play on a machine with only 2 joystick ports. These would be all of the XL and XE computers. This version was programmed by Todd Fry. In an interview with the Antic podcast, Todd said, between his work on 2600 Pac-Man and Sword Quest, and after working on an unreleased handheld system, as a new engineer at Atari, he was given the job of porting Asteroids the arcade game to the new Atari computers. He didn't do a direct conversion, but implemented an Asteroids-like game in pure assembly language. He developed it right on his own desktop Atari 800 at the office, trying for a 4K ROM, but ultimately fitting it on a 6K ROM. Released in 1981, this official Asteroids port for the 400 and 800 computers is more authentic to the arcade machine than the Atari 2600 version, but it is seen by many players as a step backwards because of its drab colors and initial slow pace. But hidden beneath the unfortunate green and blue choices is a game built to take advantage of the 4 joystick ports on the earliest Atari computers, with team, cooperative, and melee modes. It also features all of the 2600 game options such as fast or slow rocks, and shields, hyperspace, or flip as the special safety feature. But the feature that stands out right away in a single-player game is the nature of the space rocks movement, which is very much differentiated and challenging, and similar to the arcade game with diagonal movement of rocks, replacing the purely vertical movement of the 2600 kart version. The big disappointment here, though, is that instead of various colors of rocks in the 2600, they are a single blue color. Given the graphical capabilities of the machines, a nice 2-color shade could have easily been implemented. Also, removing the shade altogether and leaving more vector-like rocks might have even been better. Some features of this version, such as the asteroids bouncing off the sides of the screen and a fast asteroids mode, are hidden behind cursor keys that demand the use of the manual to know how to implement them. The fast mode is especially difficult to turn on because it can't be chosen with the selector option keys, but you have to press the F key, and the fast mode is the best way to play this game. All in all, aside from the lackluster color choices, deep down, this is a good port. You just need to know where to look. Play it with fast asteroids against a second person, and it becomes a pretty fun party game. This version was ported to the Atari 5200 and was supposed to be a launch title, but was never released as a cartridge. According to AtariProtos.com, the 5200 controllers proved to be very difficult to use with the game, and the planned, lab-implemented, but never released 5200 Asteroids controller would have fixed the issues. But this also would have meant forcing 5200 buyers to purchase another controller to play one of the first games for the system. The 5200 Asteroids VE hack seen here removes the shading from the inside of the rocks, but is still pretty difficult to control. Here I am playing it in emulation with an Xbox 360 controller, using both the D-pad and the analog controller. While it's playable, the control is far too touchy to be really fun. This is because, instead of using any of the extra buttons on the 5200, the Atari 400-800 4-way stick controls with up to thrust and down to implement hyperspace or shields or flip are still used, making it very difficult to control. If you have the new Atari multi-joy adapter and a later XE or XL machine with only 2 joystick ports, you can enjoy the recently released Asteroids M4 as a 1 to 4 player game. Matthias Ludicki patched this Asteroids multi-joy version. In this improved version, as you can see, the rocks have no shade, and one player can even control all 4 ships at one time. Asteroids II by K. McNichol seems to have been released really early in the life of the 8-bits, because it requires OSB, which is only on the Atari 400 and 800 computers. It very much reminds us of an Apple II version we used to play at a friend's house. Here, Asteroids II is playing on my 130XE and looks fine. It's an enjoyable but very slow Graphics Mode 8 high-resolution attempt at a more vector-looking Asteroids game. Asteroids with a Z is a 1985 version by John Crowdy, who is the programmer responsible for the excellent Druid port from the Commodore 64 to the Atari 8-bit computers. This simple-looking Asteroids variant plays very well and is also a Mode 8 high-resolution implementation. Meteorites, called Disasteroids while in development, was originally released for the Atari 5200 by Electra Concepts. It was ported to the Atari 8-bit computers by Homesoft in 2005. This is a more refined and colorful version and is faster than the Atari Asteroids cart, but it has many fewer rocks on the screen at one time. It's quite fun though, and was a good alternative for Asteroids that was scrapped by Atari and never originally released for the 5200. Electra Concepts also made the Master Play interface that allowed a 2600 controller to be used with the 5200, and it's even mentioned in the manual as an alternative controller. Playing this on my 130XE means we don't need the interface or any other gimmicks to see this is a quality, fun, single-player Asteroids variant. Sinistar by Atari is next. This is a 1984 unreleased prototype of the Williams arcade game that is a scrolling raster arcade blaster with 8-way controls like Time Pilot or Bosconian. This really isn't Asteroids, but there are some similarities and advances on the concept that we'd like to discuss. The actual asteroids can't be destroyed, but are mined for crystals needed to destroy the big boss, Sinistar. By getting close to a rock and shooting it, crystals are released and collected to gain Sinistar-destroying bombs. As for shooting things, you are attacked by warrior ships that can be destroyed with your ship's cannons. The scary speech of the arcade game is present in this conversion, although it seems to have been recreated and is not 100% the same as the Williams arcade version. Jeff Milhorn Kevin Satcher, Gary Johnson, Brad Fuller, and Frank Hausman were responsible for this incredible arcade conversion that would have probably set new standards and direction for Atari 8-bit computer games if it had been released and they were able to create more software as a team. Rockball by Rocklin is a really fun and well-made take on Asteroids by Anthony Weber, who was also responsible for the Gyruss Atari 8-bit port, as well as his unique and well-crafted takes on Star Castle, Star Island, Galaxian, Galactic Chase, and Space Invaders, Laser Strike. His arcade conversions are considered to be some of the finest on the Atari 8-bit. This footage from my Atari 130XE has odd artifacting or something at the bottom of the screen that is not in the emulated version. Let's take a look at the emulated version now. In an interview with Scott Stilpin, Anthony said that this is a port of an arcade machine from Techstar. His Atari conversion doesn't seem to have ever been released at all though. This game is unique in that it shows you a rectangle of safety when each player ship starts. The arcade Asteroids also did something like this, but it was not shown on the screen. The ship controls like a combination of the Asteroid ship and the Vectrex Mindstorm ship, with little inertia at first and some velocity friction that needs to be bypassed before your ship gains inertia. This game is up there with the best Asteroid variants on the Atari 8-bits. Bacterion, published by Analog Computing in 1984, is also not 100% an Asteroids clone. It's more of an Omega Race clone, but it's close enough gameplay and control-wise to be on this list. Also, it was created by two of the absolute best Atari 8-bit magazine coders, Tom Hudson and Kyle Peacock, who both also published quite a few other nice games in the magazine. The July 1984 issue of Analog's game description makes references to the Robotron arcade game. It would seem that Bacterion is a sequel 200 years later in the game timeline. You have been shrunk down and inserted into the head of a world leader. Your job is to stop the bacteria from stealing and eating the leader's brain cells. It's definitely not Asteroids, but the ship control is similar, with no inertia, but the obvious similarities made this one of our absolute favorite Atari public domain games in the mid-80s. Another title with gameplay similar to Asteroids is Activision's Zone Ranger by Dan Thompson. Dan was responsible for Hardball, Twerps, Final Orbit, and a few other 8-bit gaming gems. This 8-way scrolling blaster was released for the 5200 and Atari 8-bit computers in 1984. It takes advantage of all the best features of the machines graphically and sonically, and adds gameplay elements to the Asteroids formula such as warp holes and an inner sanctum to explore. Again, not Asteroids per se, but quite a nice variant that shows how powerful the Atari 8-bits and 5200 could be in the right hands. Megaoids from Atari Sales is a fast, technically well put together game by Peter J. Meyer that was started as a Turbo Basic game and then ported to all assembly language for release in 2017. This is a fast and furious Asteroids variant with collectible ship power-ups and a lot of rocks and spacey things to blast. There are some references to the Blasteroids arcade game here too, with the ship upgrades and the portal you have to enter between levels. On the downside, the player ship is frustratingly slow to thrust, which is also similar to Blasteroids. All in all, this game is fun and much better than the Atari released Asteroids cart. It will play on any Atari machine with 48K. And finally, we come to probably the best. The freeware Asteroids Emulator Atari 8-bit port by Norbert Kurter was released in 2012. It uses the actual arcade ROM and renders the game in Atari 8-bit Graphics 8 high-res mode. It's a little slower than the arcade, but it's the one you want to play on the Atari 8-bit computers for the most authentic arcade action. Norbert was also responsible for the fun port of Commodore Petoskey Galaga and Radar Rat Race to the Atari 8-bit computer. So there we have it, 11 games that are based on the Asteroids theme for the Atari 8-bit computer and 5200 systems. They run the gamut from games that are the essence of the coin-op through imaginative retakes on the genre and finally to an actual emulation of real arcade hardware. Next time we move to the 16-bit Atari ST range of computers, where we find another impressive array of good, sometimes bad, and excellent takes on the asteroid genre. Until next time, into the vertical blank.
Into the vertical blank.
Into the vertical blank. Generation Atari. Into the vertical blank. Generation Atari.
Into the vertical blank.
An 8-bit Rocket Studios production.